Welcome into Real Pod Wednesdays. Dan Hope joined by Andy Anders as we are now less than 1 week away from Big Ten Media Days. We are just over 2 weeks away from preseason camp. So the start of Ohio State football season is almost upon us. Are you getting that excitement, Andy?
I am. This is when I said it in our group chat earlier. This is when the gas pedal hits the floor for us next week. We'll get back from Big Ten Media Days. There'll be moving. Camp will start up, and that's when it all starts rolling. August, it's kind of, summer's kind of lax. There's not a whole lot going on necessarily, not a lot of news hitting the cycle in June and July. Once August comes, once Big Ten Media Days comes, it's full bore until, the football season's over, basically. So it's an exciting time. It's always the most stressful time, as in this job, but that's why you do it. When I'm in Ohio Stadium on a game day and you breathe in that air and you just have that moment of like, man, this is why I do this. So I am overjoyed for football season coming up and excited to just keep the coverage going.
Yeah, we will have full coverage of Big Ten Media Days coming to you on next week's episode. We'll be recording right from Lucas Oil Stadium to give you some coverage of the Buckeyes, who will be speaking in Indianapolis next Tuesday before our next episode of Real Pod Wednesdays. But on this week's episode, we are going to have a little fun with an exercise that Colin Haas-Hill and I started several years ago on the original lineup of Real Pod Wednesdays. Griffin Strom and I kept it going, and now Andy Anders. We did do it for basketball, but we're going to do it for football now. Our annual preseason team draft, where we're going to go head-to-head against each other, drafting 11-on-11 lineups, both offense and defense. We're going to pick 44 players in total, and we're going to kind of try to maneuver each other to try to put together the best possible team of Buckeyes to go against another team of Buckeyes. And then we'll have a poll up on 11warriors.com where you guys can vote on who had the best team. Looking back at last year, Andy, Griffin, he got 71% of a vote against me. So you've got some big shoes to fill. I have not fared particularly well in these drafts over the years. So, it's up to you to try to keep that going.
Well, you've got the benefit of experience on your side. Me and Griffin are buddies going back, and I was always impressed with his drafting skills. So I'm hoping that I can live up to the reputation of being that guy to undermine your selections.
It is interesting just looking back at last year's picks really quickly to just see, how some of them played out. Marvin Harrison Jr. went number one. That was no surprise. And certainly he lived up to being that number one pick. But, you look back, Carson Hinsman went in the top 10 last year, even though he was a first-time center. He went above the likes of Denzel Burke, Mike Hall, Jack Sawyer, Cade Stover, Lathan, Ransom. I'd be surprised if Carson Hinsman goes above Denzel Burke and Jack Sawyer this year, but I guess you never know. You look back, a guy like Tyleik Williams went all the way down to 24th, where Griffin was able to snap him up. So it's always kind of interesting to look back and see how some things changed. Josh Proctor got drafted after Jahad Carter because at the time we were thinking Jahad Carter was going to be Ohio State starting free safety, not Josh Proctor. So it's always interesting to see kind of how things play out, look back on it a year later and see what would have changed. But I've been going into this draft, of all the years we've been doing it, this might have been the hardest year for me in terms of setting my draft board because this team has so many good players. Like usually there's like, okay, these are like 3, 4, 5 guys like I really want on my team. But this year there's like 15 guys I really want on my team. So I'm really fascinated to see how this plays out, to see whether my board ends up mirroring yours in terms of how this draft plays out, or if I have to make some adjustments on the fly based on you throwing me some curveballs.
Right. I don't want to reveal too much strategy or anything, but of course, a lot of this is going to be based on positional scarcity, I think. And that's going to dictate, you might be surprised to see some guys go as low or as high as they do. That's always a thing with these drafts. And the thing about this team is certain positions are really deep. And so there's some stars on the team that might fall a little bit, at least I know on my draft board, compared to where I'd like, if I were ranking Ohio State's players 1 to 50, they'd go much higher. but I might draft him later because maybe that position is a little more stacked than certain others. So that's going to play a big factor into this, and I'm just excited to get it started here.
To refresh you all on the format for this draft, we're each going to make 22 picks. We each have to draft 11 players on offense, 11 players on defense. The criteria are we each have to draft 1 quarterback, 5 offensive linemen, and 5 offensive skill position players. So you can draft 2 running backs if you want. You can draft 2 tight ends if you want. You can't draft 2 quarterbacks just to take a quarterback from the other team. It has to be a realistic lineup that you would run an offense with. Defensively, same thing. You have to draft at least 3 defensive linemen, at least 2 linebackers, at least 4 defensive backs. The other 2 are up to your discretion. So if you want to run a more traditional 4-3, you can do that. If you want to run the nickel-based defense that Ohio State currently uses, you can do that. If you want to have a jack linebacker in there, you can do that too. So a little bit of flexibility, but some ground rules to kind of keep this thing on the rails. So, Andy, I've got Google flip a coin up here. I'm going to give you the honor of calling heads or tails, and then I will flip it.
I was captain of my JV team in football as a sophomore, and my saying was always tails never fails, so we're going tails.
And it is heads, which means I get the choice of whether I get the number 1 pick. And honestly, this is a tough choice because, again, there's not that, clear cut, this guy's for sure the number 1 pick. You think back to years when there was, Justin Fields and CJ Stroud. It's you're taking the number 1 pick. You can't pass it up. This year, I could go either way, but I am going to go ahead and take the number 1 pick, and I'm going to go ahead and take Caleb Downs because I think there's a few guys I could have considered here, but it goes back to what Andy said in the intro about the depth at each position. Safety, there's not a whole lot of depth at safety on this team. Caleb Downs might be the best player on the team, might be the best safety in the country. So he's the one guy that I really did not want to miss out on.
Yeah, that was my number 1 pick too, not going to lie. Right at the top, probably combination of talent, positional scarcity just makes too much sense, I think. So for me, he was number 1 choice that popped right in my mind. And speaking of positional scarcity, that's going to dictate my pick at number 2. I'm going Donovan Jackson. I think that's the only surefire offensive lineman on this team where everyone's going to look at and say that's the anchor. And for a really thin offensive line room, I think it's important to kind of set that. Now there's a lot of directions to go at 3, I think, because I wanted to get an early offensive lineman off the board. Obviously, Caleb Downs was at the top of my list. I think at this point, all the directions I can go, it always makes sense to just go best available. For me, I think Emeka Egbuka. People maybe sleeping on what he can be this year, but this is a guy who's proven in the past he can be a super productive receiver when healthy. Even with all the hype around Jeremiah Smith, he's going to be the top guy in that room, which is always a lead under Brian Hartline. So I'm getting the offensive side of the football first, which is odd given how defensive driven we both think this team is going to be. But for me, I think Donovan Jackson for the positional scarcity, and then Emeka Egbuka, I think, might be the best player available after Caleb Downs is now off the board.
2 very good picks there. Cannot argue with those. Donovan Jackson would have been one of my next 2 picks. So I had a feeling you were going to do that since you are an offensive line guy, but I wasn't sure.
You know it.
It's tough now. I'm already okay, Rick, there's 3 or 4 guys here that I'm really considering with these 2 picks. I'm going to start out. If you gave me 2 chances to take Denzel Burke and I didn't take Denzel Burke, then, that would be kind of off brand for me because I've said several times I think Denzel Burke is the best player on this team and one of the best players in the entire country. And so I'm not going to pass up the chance to take Denzel Burke when I get a second chance at it. And so I got to go with Denzel Burke there. And then with my second choice, I've made the mistake in this draft too many times of letting my opponent get the top 2 or more offensive linemen. So I'm not going to make that mistake again. So I'm going to go ahead and take Josh Simmons to ensure that Andy does not get both of the left side of the offensive line.
Good choices. Denzel was next on my board right after Emeka. And, cornerback, I think, is a sneaky position in this draft, which is why my next pick is Jordan Hancock. I'm not sure who's next up at that nickel spot. It's probably Jermaine Matthews, but as far as like surefire guy to play that slot spot, if you want to stick with the base formation of Ohio State's defense, I think Jordan makes a lot of sense. I think Jordan's obviously a fantastic player, but just the variety of skills he can give you, and again, kind of the scarcity of that nickel position made that make a lot of sense for me. Next, I'm going to go D-line, and a lot of great guys to choose from there, but I want to kind of establish an anchor to get after the quarterback, because that's the modern college football game, right? You got to protect the quarterback, get after the quarterback, have a great quarterback. Jack Sawyer, I think, is the defensive lineman I'm most high on. I have not been shy about that opinion, even dating back to last year, being the cool guy who was in on the Jack Sawyer hype before everybody else, not to pat myself on the back too much, but got to stay on brand with that one. So went to 2 offensive selections in my first 2, this time 2 defensive selections with Jordan Hancock and Jack Sawyer.
Good choices there. I didn't see the Hancock one coming, I will say, but I get it, because you're right. Like, he's the guy, like that slot position. He's the guy can play it. So I totally get that pick. Jack was in my next group of 3. So if you had gone a different direction here, good chance I would have taken him. But my next 2 picks, I almost took Will Howard with my last pick. I'm going to take Will Howard now. I mean, he's the most likely starting quarterback on the team. It's the most important position on the team. So I'm not going to go any longer without taking Will Howard as my quarterback. And then I'm going to bet on the upside here. You already got Emeka, Egbuka. I got to take Jeremiah Smith. I mean, if he's as good as he looked like he can be this spring, he could be one of the best wide receivers in the country. I don't want you to have both Emeka and Jeremiah on your team. So I got to go with Jeremiah Smith.
Jeremiah is an excellent pick. There's a couple different directions I'm thinking of going at this next thing here. What do I want to do with this? All right. So I think it's a must that I draft Lathan Ransom fairly high, since you already got Downs, and that's the other starting safety, and we're uncertain about the depth behind those guys. Some people that maybe, have some upside, but I think I need a cornerstone at that safety position in the secondary. I think Lathan Ransom makes a lot of sense here. And that was a note I had on my draft. It's like, if Dan gets Caleb before you need to remember to draft Lathan. So I'm going to go Lathan Ransom here, and then follow it up with really, I think, solidifying that offensive line, because, again, positional scarcity makes too much sense. Seth McLaughlin, I think, is next up on the board. There's an argument maybe to be had with Josh Fryar, but for me, I think that cornerstone and the guy who's going to be setting the protections for Ohio State, I really like that interior tandem of Seth McLaughlin and Donovan Jackson for me. So those are my next 2 selections.
Well, I'm going to have to respond to that. There's 4 surefire offensive linemen on his team. I want to get at least 2 of them. So I will take Josh Fryar with my next pick. That way I get both of the starting tackles and feel pretty good about that. And now I'm in another spot. Okay, where there's 3 or 4 guys here that I could go with, but I'm going to go for a guy that some people think is the best NFL draft prospect on this entire team. I mentioned earlier he fell too far in this draft last year. You could argue he's fallen too far again. I don't want him to fall any further, so I am going to take Tyleik Williams to anchor my defensive line.
Great idea. Tyleik would have been my next D lineman off the board. And when you talk about interior guys, I think that's the best place to go. Definitely a buyer's market here on the offensive lineman, and it might confuse some people to see so many linemen drafted this high. I got to get a tackle, so I'm going Tegra Tshabola, and I'm playing him at tackle. I think that makes the most sense. I think outside of the other tackle options you have behind the starting tandem of Josh Simmons and Josh Fryar, Tegra's probably the best fit, has played the position in the past, and seems to have more upside than maybe some of the guys backing them up. And I can't let you get Tegra, put him at guard, and leave me with no other options at tackle. So that's going to be my next selection for sure. I think next, then, I'm going to go with let's go with a little bit of linebacker here, Sonny Styles. I'm really high on what he can do around the defense this year. There's a lot of versatility there. And while his positional scarcity isn't as high as others, given that you also have C.J. Hicks in that role, potentially at will linebacker, I just think Sonny's upside, what he can provide, not just at that spot, but maybe moving around the formations of the defense a little bit. Really high on what Sonny can do this year, and he's just a player I really wanted on my team because I'm really sold on what he can bring.
Well, I didn't think JT Tuimoloau would still be here at the 16th pick, so I'm going to go ahead and take JT Tuimoloau. You already got Jack Sawyer, so this gives me two of the top three defensive linemen on the team as I now pair JT Tuimoloau with Tyleik Williams. And then I'm going to go TreVeyon Henderson. Again, I think really good value getting him at number 17. As you talked about before, they have two really good running backs. So that's why neither of them went earlier than now. But I can't let TreVeyon Henderson fall any further than 17.
Totally fair. Now I see the tricky thing I was thinking of doing earlier was taking both TreVeyon and Quinshon and plugging them into a 2 running back system.
I was a little worried when I did.
I
almost took one of them with my previous pick because I'm like, if Andy wants to be mean, I'm giving him the opportunity to do it right now.
I was right there, but it was like, okay, I need to get Lathan, and so I can't take both. That was the thought process earlier, and then I didn't do it with the last 2 selections, I guess, either. But Quinshon Judkins then has to be my response so that you can't do that to me.
I was gonna do it. I was like, I'm hoping that he will not go that way because I almost did it there. I'm like, should I just take them both and then give him JT? I'm like, I won't be that mean.
Yeah. All right. So we're gonna take Quinshon there, and I don't have an outside corner yet, so I'm gonna go with Davison Igbinosun. The best run defending corner I've ever seen play at Ohio State. Maybe. I mean, you talk about over 50 tackles as a corner. It's pretty ridiculous, and also he's going to take another step this year, I think. People forget he was only a second-year player last year, and I think year 2 to year 3 guys usually take a pretty huge jump. So Davison Igbinosun to give me my number 1 cornerback.
2 great picks there. Those would have been my 2 picks as well, so I think you got those right. I don't want to risk letting you get 3 of the top 4 corners, so I'm going to go ahead now and take Jermaine Matthews Jr. To pair him with Denzel Burke. And I feel really good about that pairing. And then another one here where there's a few different guys I could go with, but I am going to go with Cody Simon. Let's go with Cody Simon, get the anchor at Mike linebacker for the middle of his defense.
Great choice there. And a guy, I think, again, positional scarcity. There's other Mikes on the roster, and I think the guy now left for me at Mike is going to have a really good year this year, in my opinion. I'm not going to draft him just yet, but there's a couple guys you could really plug into that Mike spot anyway. But for me, I think now that both running backs are off the board, we each have a receiver, I'm going to go ahead and get my number 2 weapon out there. And it's tough to choose between Carnell Tate and Brandon Inniss. Definitely both great arguments to be that next guy up. I know the coaching staff is really high on what Carnell can provide, and obviously had more reps last year, but I actually think Brandon Inniss is going to have a bigger year. I think that he's so explosive as a player. After the catch ability is great, which is awesome when you're talking about gathering those yards. So for me, Brandon Inniss is my next pick. Get a second weapon for Devin Brown to throw to when I eventually draft Devin Brown, because obviously you already took Howard. So we're going to then go to, there's some options here for sure, kind of looking through what I want to do. I haven't addressed the interior of the defensive line yet. I think that's kind of the one position that is left out there for me. So I'm going to go ahead and take the other starter. You already took Tyleik. I'm going to take Ty Hamilton and pair him with one of the other depth guys later. But I think Jack Sawyer and Ty Hamilton give me a pretty solid foundation to go up against your picks of JT and Tyleik there.
Good choices there. Ty was the other guy I was strongly considering at my last pick, so I had a feeling I would not get him to my next pick, but I was hoping. And I mean, I'm a big Brandon Inniss guy, so I can't fault you for that selection at all. I totally agree with you that I think he's a guy that could have a huge year. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get my other starting linebacker now as well, and I'm going to go ahead and get CJ Hicks. To ensure that you cannot get both Sonny Styles and CJ Hicks. And so I will take CJ Hicks, and that fills out my starting lineup at linebacker. And then couple different routes that I could go here. You took Seth McLaughlin, so I need a center. So I'm going to go ahead and take Carson Hinsman before you can take him to potentially play guard.
Yeah, those are great selections. I was hoping you were going to say Josh Padilla there for a second, since Hinsman slid over, and maybe I could just slide in and take Hinsman real quick. But that was a clear choice, I think, and some versatility there too, right? Could play either center or guard on the roster. So there's some stuff there, like kind of I got Tegra for that same reason, sliding him over to tackle. To then later select what I'm going to do now, Luke Montgomery, and put him at right guard. Taking I think that's a pretty decent quartet to serve as the main foundation of my offensive line, and then we're probably going to have a little more of a low grade pick at my last tackle spot later here, or maybe I could even slide Luke out depending on what's available. But we're going to have Donovan Jackson, Seth McLaughlin, Luke Montgomery, Tegra, Tshabola. I'm happy with that. I'm happy with the upside of that offensive line. Some potential there. Now, where do I go next? I think, I'm going to take Malik Hartford here and round out my tandem at safety because I think there's a clear delineation between him and whoever's next. Positional scarcity-wise, I think pairing him with Lathan makes a lot of sense because he's more of a free safety. Lathan's more of a strong safety. So Malik Hartford is my next choice.
He would have been one of my next two choices, so smart pick there. I was very worried if I didn't take Carnell Tate with my last pick, I was going to lose out on him. So I won't take that risk any longer. I will take Carnell Tate. I think he's the best player on the board at this point pretty clearly. So getting him to pair him with Jeremiah and give me two weapons with a ton of upside at wide receiver. And then the second pick, now we're getting to the territory where there's a lot of different directions I could go here. So thinking about what I need most to fill out my roster here, I am going to go ahead and take the team's likely starting tight end, and I will take G. Scott Jr.
Great selection. He was number one on my board as far as what's left. I was probably going to take G next, simply because
figured
clearly the team starter next year. And I think as far as starters left on the board, that might have been really the only one.
Yeah.
So that's that was definitely a great selection there. Kind of looking at the other holes I need to fill on the team now, and I think I'm going to go ahead and take Caden McDonald here and pair him. Well, maybe not actually, because I want Ty to play the 3 or the 1, so might actually pocket that one. Let's see who else on the board. Questions. I mean, the thing is, I feel like a lot of the best players are off the board now. Yeah. kind of.
Yeah, we are definitely in backup territory now. We have taken all 22 projected starters, and really every player who's really in the mix for a starting job is now off the board. And so now we're really in the matter of, okay, who are the best second teamers we can get to fill out our rosters?
Right. And it's just like at certain positions, it's so like I could go either way on 2 guys where we both need one. And it's like, scarcity wise, even there's not a lot of choices left. I need another outside corner. I am thinking about Lorenzo Styles Jr., but I like him better at nickel, and I already have Jordan Hancock. I could slide Jordan Hancock out. That's an option. Or, because Jordan has played outside, or I could play Lorenzo outside, or I could go elsewhere for an outside corner. There's other guys. I think I got to make a decision here. So I'm actually going to just go ahead and pull the trigger on Caden Curry, get my second defensive end to go with Jack Sawyer. It's close between him and Kenyatta, splitting hairs a little bit there, but I like Caden's versatility. I like his motor. I think I'm a little higher on what he can achieve this year, so I'm going to go ahead and snap him off the board. And then take Gabe Powers to play the mic for me with the next pick, really kind of rounding out some of the defensive spots here. And, in case you want to play a 3 linebacker set, want to go ahead and make sure I have the other guy I want at the position.
All right. Well, thanks for telling me you were almost going to take my nose tackle and my nickel corner. So I'm going to go ahead and take Caden McDonald and Lorenzo Styles Jr.
So there you go.
Yeah.
Perfect. See, now I reveal too much sometimes when I talk.
You did.
I'm a loud thinker, and this is where I said, the experience factor is playing a part in here. And now the pressure is back on me. I will say less this time, since less seems to be more in this scenario. And this time, I'm just going to go ahead and take Bryson Rogers to play my third receiver spot. And we'll get Jelani Thurman to be my starting tight end. I think what he can do this year, again, I like upside here. I'm trying to think of that, what can be with some of these guys. And I think Jelani, all the pedigree with his recruiting, everything, I'm big on what he can do in year 2, even playing behind G a little bit. And so that's my next selection there, and I've got my full arsenal of weapons now for, again, the eventual Devin Brown pick that's going to be made later in the round.
Yeah, no, those are smart choices, because I was considering the possibility of taking Jelani Thurman and going to tight end offense. So that was a smart choice by you to take Jelani Thurman there when you did. We've kind of reached the point in the draft now where it's really just about filling holes. Basically, what I need to do here is I need to round out my offensive line. And so I'll take Austin Searveld, since he is the best guard available, and then trying to figure out who's now the best available after Austin Searveld, based on the fact that you have taken both Tegra and Luke, and I've moved Carson Hinsman to center. I think you mentioned Joshua Padilla before. I think he is the best choice to round out my offensive line. So I'm going to have a very Josh-heavy offensive line, because I've got Josh Simmons, Joshua Padilla, and Josh Fryar. Maybe we'll have to go back to calling Josh Jimmy Simmons like we did for about 2 weeks last year.
It's the charge of the Joshes, the fighting Joshes up there. Oh, that's so funny. All right. I've only got 3 starting spots left open, or 4. I've got 4 left open. One of them is reserved for one of my last 2 picks. So we're going to go ahead and take Jason Moore to pair with Ty Hamilton. And, Hero Kanu was the other debate here at 3 tech. And I don't think there's anything revealing about saying that. But Larry Johnson talked about Jason Moore taking the biggest jump this spring among defensive linemen. The length that he provides, the pass rushing presence I think he's going to give as that guy who was sort of a tweener coming out of high school between D end and D tackle, like Jason Moore, to play that 3 tech. And I think he'll play well off of Ty Hamilton, who's just a physical wall of force in there, kind of a stump, to use some old terminology. And then, I've got to fill one more tackle spot here, and it's, kind of, the next guy up is either George Fitzpatrick or Zid Mahalski, and I think I'm a little higher on George Fitzpatrick. I'm going to go with George Fitzpatrick to complete my offensive line. The idea of this, there wasn't going to be 10 good offensive linemen to take. Obviously, we've both now got our 5s, but this is, I think I'm happy with a solid 4 other than George. No offense to him, but that's the feeling I have. It's like, if I have those 4 other solid guys, I can have one who's like, I don't know, So that's my next, my third to last pick, George Fitzpatrick.
That would have been my choice as well. I mean, I definitely did not come into this draft expecting that Hero Kanu would go undrafted. He's the highest rated player on my board, but, I've already taken all my defensive linemen. So, like you said, it was really a matter of, I actually had Hero rated ahead of Caden McDonald on my board, but because I took Tyleik, I wanted Caden to play that nose tackle position. And so that's why I ended up going with Caden over Hero. But he's definitely a player I would not have anticipated would go undrafted. But I think it reflects the fact that there's kind of 3 guys that are really close together there in that backup defensive tackle rotation between Hero Kanu, Caden McDonald, Jason Moore. Who ultimately plays the most among them is to be determined, but I think we're going to see all three of them in that rotation in some capacity this year. I've got 3 more spots to fill. I'll go ahead and start out by grabbing my second defensive end and drafting Kenyatta Jackson Jr. Pretty self-explanatory pick there. Him being the number 4 defensive end on the roster. Certainly not upset about getting him at the 40th pick. And then I need to get my final skill position offensive player. There's a couple different options I could go here. Like I could go Will Kacmarek and play a 2 tight end offense if I want, but I'm going to go ahead and bet on a freshman upside again, and I am going to take the other 5-star freshman wide receiver, Mylan Graham.
Now, I was interested to see what you were going to do with that last weapon spot, whether it be a receiver, whether it be a tight end. Jaden Ballard, kind of like out there. Do we know what he's going to be? He's all these, every offseason it seems like this is the year Jaden Ballard could get involved, but then there's all these talented youngsters. It's like, a lot of directions you can go with that last spot, but I've already got a pretty nice trio established to receive for myself, So I think there's only 2 spots left to draft for me. I'll go ahead and take Devin Brown. Been saying it ever since you took Will Howard. Was going to draft him. It was a given because that's the next guy up. Although there is an argument for Julian Sayin here.
It wasn't like because I was very unsure about what I was going to do if you took Will Howard. I was having that debate before we started this draft of do I take Devin Brown or do I take Julian Sayin, because we're hearing such good things about Julian. It would have been a tough choice for me. I think I would have gone the same route you did and taken Devin Brown, but that would have been a tough choice for me. I was glad I didn't have to make it.
Yeah, and I'm on record saying earlier this offseason, I had very high praise for Julian Sayin, we'll say, where I thought he could be the starter eventually this year. I think the end of spring, some of that hype kind of fizzled out around him being this year the guy. I think long-term Julian Sayin is going to be a superstar, but this year, I think Devin Brown's experience, if he can stay healthy, and I'm not writing him off yet in the quarterback competition overall. There's still a non-zero chance he could beat Will Howard. And so I think all that consideration for me made Devin the choice. My last spot is at corner. Really, it's a debate between Calvin Simpson-Hunt or one of the freshmen, and I'm going to go with Calvin Simpson-Hunt. His athletic upside, really strong, the length, the speed, track star in Texas, all this stuff. I think he's next after sort of that core group of outside corners that we've discussed. The top 4 guys, really, because I think Jordan would slide out before Calvin would play. But that's, I think, as far as what's left at corner, that's who I'm going to pair with Davison and Igbinosun on the outside. And I think I'm pretty happy with how my secondary turned out still with Davison and with Jordan.
Yeah, I mean, the depth at corner is like, I felt like, as long as we each got, you almost threw me a curveball there. Because if you would take it, like, I would have thought about the same thing if I was in your shoes. Take Lorenzo, push Jordan outside. Then who's Dan going to take to be a slot corner? What I probably would have done was drafted Calvin and moved Jermaine into the slot because we've seen Jermaine play some of that nickel. So that's probably what I would have done. I think it would have ended up being the same 6 corners anyway, but I think our lineups will reflect a more realistic in terms of what positions guys are actually going to play in Ohio State secondaries this year, with Jordan and Lorenzo being the inside guys and Denzel, Davison, Jermaine, and Calvin being the outside guys. Last pick for me, I guess got to draft my second safety. You were smart to draft Malik Hartford for sure, because, I think this is definitely one of those spots where there is a drop off there in terms of that 4th guy. And that's why we're waiting until the last pick of the draft here. The question is, do you go with Keenan Nelson Jr., who's got some experience playing at South Carolina, or do you bet on a younger guy like a Jaden Bonsu or a Jalen McLean? I think that's kind of a coin flip, but given the fact that Keenan Nelson Jr. has started games in the SEC, has some experience actually playing, I'm going to go with that. So I'm going to take Keenan Nelson Jr. to round out this draft.
Yeah, awesome selection. You mentioned the nickelback stuff. I think the other option, sneakily, might have been a 3 linebacker system with Arvell Reese. That was a thought that also occurred to me if I had to go there, was put obviously I have Gabe Powers at the mic, but either he or Cody Simon, and then I imagine Sonny and CJ were going to split amongst the two of us, and then you could kind of sneak Arvell in there as that third linebacker if you needed, if your nickel depth or corner depth was lacking. That was the other thought I had. But overall, I think honestly pretty even how these teams turned out. And maybe that's a sunshine look for me because I think you got a pretty good roster over there too. But I'm happy with my team, but I'm definitely like, there were some picks you got where it's like, okay, yeah, that was maybe an oversight on my part.
Yeah, Andy, I feel pretty good about how I came out of this. I mean, I got the starting quarterback most likely in Will Howard. I got one of the top 2 running backs in TreVeyon Henderson. I feel like a ton of upside in my receiving core with Jeremiah Smith, Carnell Tate, Mylan Graham, able to get the likely starting tight end in G. Scott Jr. Offensive line to have both starting tackles. I think that's huge. I feel better having the starting tackles and some backups on the interior offensive line than I would have the other way around. So I feel good about what I got there on the offensive line. Defensive line, I think it's pretty much a coin flip between our two teams. We both got 2 of the top 4 guys and 2 of the next 4 guys. So, I like what I have: JT, Kenyatta, Tyleik, Caden, McDonald. But to say one is really better than the other, I think it's pretty much a push there. I'm happy to get 2 of the top 3 linebackers in Cody Simon and CJ Hicks. That very well could be the starting linebacker tandem. So I feel good about having that twosome. Corner, I feel really good about it because we've said a lot of times Jermaine Matthews Jr. would be starting for any other team in the country. So I think that outside pairing is elite. You do have an advantage at that nickel spot because Lorenzo is very unproven as a nickel back. I mean, we think he can be a good player at that position, but he hasn't actually played it yet at the collegiate level. So I definitely have a little bit of a question mark there at the nickel spot, but still felt like he was the best guy. And then, to have Caleb Downs in the back end. I mean, to have Denzel, Burke, and Caleb Downs, that's a really good feeling for the secondary. A couple of question marks there, Lorenzo Styles Jr. and Keenan Nelson Jr. But when you got Denzel, Burke, Jermaine Matthews, and Caleb Downs, you're still going to feel pretty good about what you got on the back end.
Yeah, I think overall for me, the weapons on offense pretty strong. I like the upside of a lot of those choices that I got. TreVeyon and Quinshon's kind of splitting hairs between the two of us. I don't think Devin Brown is a bad player to have at quarterback at all. Obviously, Will Howard has the better chance of being the starter, but Devin Brown's still in the thick of that competition, as we've talked about. And, for me, I think that he's going to have guys to throw to. When you talk about Emeka, when you talk about Brandon Ennis, I think Bryson Rogers has a lot of upside and will get involved in the rotation this year. There's a reason they worked hard to keep him from entering, or to get him back from the transfer portal, I should say. Jelani Thurman there at tight end, even though G. Scott's the clear starter, I think in terms of athletic upside at that position specifically, I think Jelani Thurman might have a higher ceiling for his career. Who's to say if that plays out this year, but it could. Offensive line, I think, and biased toward myself, right? I think I'd take overall my offensive line group over what you got. Even getting the 2 starting tackles, I'll admit, pretty big. And my biggest hole is going to be that second starting tackle with George Fitzpatrick. But that interior, man, Donovan Jackson, Seth McLaughlin, and Luke Montgomery could very well be the starting trio on the inside. And if not, I got the guy who will be probably that other part of that starting trio to play right tackle in Tegra Tshabola, who I think could have as much upside at that position this year as Josh Fryar, personally. Maybe not at right tackle specifically, but as an offensive lineman in general, and what he can give you at right guard. If Luke ends up playing better, you can always, if Luke factors in more of as a tackle and Tegra is more of a guard, that there's some versatility there on that right side. And I think the upside of that right side of the offensive line is really good. So I'm pretty happy with what I got there on my front 5. Defensively, again, you could take either D-line here. Like you said, we both got 2 of the top 4 guys. I think there's a lot of what Jason Moore, Caden Curry, and for Sonny Styles, I think that's just a dynamic weapon to move about formations and really mess with offenses. That's how Ohio State, I think, is going to deploy him in a lot of spots this year. He could win out There's a good chance he could win out that starting will linebacker spot. It really feels like a toss-up to this point in the offseason between he and CJ Hicks. You have CJ, I have Sonny, I think that position is a coin flip, but I really like what Sonny can provide across the whole of the defense. For me, I think my biggest depth strength overall over your team is at safety, just because I have two that you can feel good about. Caleb Downs is probably maybe the player you feel best about on the defense, but what's Keenan Nelson? What can Keenan Nelson provide? In that back end, it's who's to say. So that safety spot is where I feel pretty good as well with the defense. Jordan Hancock locking it down at nickel and kind of playing off that tandem too. I mean, the middle of the defense in the secondary, really good for me, I think. Davison Igbinosun is a fine number one cornerback to have, and Calvin Simpson-Hunt. Maybe the biggest question mark on my defensive side, just because really unproven entering his second year, but this was a guy that the staff got in on early on the recruiting trail, or earlier, was kind of overlooked by some schools, and then he was a late riser down the stretch of his recruitment because of that athletic upside, where maybe he didn't show as much on the field early in his high school career, but a guy that has a great athletics profile to play that cornerback position. So if he's taking a big step in year two, I like my value there, although who's to say how much he's going to see the field this year behind that top four, starting three, and then Jermaine, that is there. So I think my strengths really are at safety, comparatively along the offensive line a little bit. I've got some good weapons. I think there's a pretty good balance to my roster, but I think it's a pretty tight race between the two of us.
Yeah, I feel good about my team. Sounds like you do too. So we're going to have to leave it up to the readers to decide. We'll have to see. Our guy Garrett Hodge, he got early access to the video game. Maybe he can make us two rosters and simulate a game, and we can see whose team would win. I'm not sure how editable the rosters are in this new game, but maybe Garrett can figure that out for us. But yeah, if you're not watching this on 11warriors.com, go over to 11warriors.com. We've got a poll there at the bottom of our article outlining this entire draft where you can cast your vote. I don't know. I'm feeling pretty good. I feel pretty good about my shot at redemption, but I haven't been, I haven't gotten a lot of love from the readers the last few times we've done this. And so, we'll see how it goes. I think, certainly I think, the reason why we do this exercise, it's a lot of fun for us. It's a little more fun this time of year when there's not a whole lot going on than just, speculating about, the same things we've talked about over and over again. So, we have a lot of fun doing this, but I think the other thing that it does, at least in my mind, is it kind of forces us to think critically about the depth of this team. Cause it's easy to just spin everything and make things put a positive bow on everything. But when you have to actually strategize of building a team, then it really makes you think about the facts. Oh yeah, this team is loaded with defensive linemen. This team is, got tons of talented wide receivers. At safety, they could be an injury away from being a concerning situation. Offensive line, they could be an injury away from being a concerning situation, particularly at tackle. So I think that, when you do a draft like this, it's a kind of a good way of making you really think about, where this team is really strong and where they still got to fortify some depth coming up here in preseason camp.
Yeah, it's a great exercise for that. We talked about positional scarcity, of course, and it really does force you to think about those things, and also value to the team just overall, who's sometimes you're going to take that guy who's, because it's thin at a position, but also it does also make you look at just who's the best available, who's going to be important for the team this year, and set that depth chart that you believe is going to give you the best advantage, I guess, in the poll that we'll get all the votes on here soon. But I had a lot of fun drafting these teams, coming up with my draft board and kind of strategizing about it. Like I said, the experience advantage, I think, played a part for you, but I think I've got a good chance to keep up the winning streak for the non-Dan Hope side of Real Pod Wednesdays. We're in the anti-Dan Hope camp just for a single day when this post goes up. So I'm excited to see what the results are.
Well, we hope you all enjoyed it as much as we did. Again, go vote, and we'll see who has the bragging rights next week when we come at you from Indianapolis with coverage of Big Ten Media Days. We're really looking forward to that. So thanks again for watching this week. We hope you'll join us again next week.